we're going to be talking about employee records. One of the things that I get asked quite a lot is, what sort of employee records are my employers meant to keep, and am I entitled to them? Look, the short answer is you're entitled to all your employee records. The Fair Work Act talks about this, the Fair Work regulations talk about this, inspection of employee records. And if we just go to it, an employer must make a copy of employee records available for inspection and copying by request of the employee or former employee for whom the records relate. So yeah, you're absolutely entitled to your employee records. You're entitled to them within 14 days of requesting them. And if you don't receive your employee records within the time frame required under the Fair Work Regulations and the Act, you have recourse in the courts. There are penalties attached to not receiving your employee records. Now, if you get word that your employee records haven't been kept because of some catastrophic event like floods or there's been a fire, then that is most likely a good reason. Yeah, we hear a lot that employee records have been lost in floods. Up at Roma, there was some really big floods a while ago, and there were a lot of people in a lot of pain during that time, and a lot of employee records went under during that time as well. And of course, businesses have really weird events that happen, like they get lost in movement and stuff like this. So it is important for an employer to keep your records safe because, of course, they're your private documents. But also it's important to understand that if your employer doesn't have the records and they have a good reason, then there may not be a legal recourse. But we can certainly assist you in obtaining those records. We have some pro forma letters that we can send out to your employer at a pretty low cost to request those employee records, and that letter will provide all the information your employer needs to know in terms of what sort of records that you are entitled to. Now, what can you do if you need your employee records? Well, like I said, you're entitled to your employee records by asking for them, and you generally ask for them in writing. What type of employee records must your employer keep? The type of records that your employer needs to keep need to be in a form that's readily accessible when inspected. They need to be legible in English, preferably. They must be kept for 7 years. They can't be altered unless for the purposes of correcting an error, and they can't be false or misleading. Now, the sort of records that general employment records can include your employer's name, the employer's ABN, the employee's name, the employee's commencement date, the basis of your employment, whether you have whether you're part-time, full-time, casual, etc. Now, records on your pay slips need to include the rate of pay to be paid, the gross and net amounts, and any deductions to that gross amount. And we've talked about deductions a little bit in a different webpage. And details of any incentive-based payments, bonuses, loadings, penalty rates, and so on. Also, records relating to your hours of work should be included. In the case of a casual or irregular part-time employee who's guaranteed a set pay rate, a reference of time worked and the record of hours worked by that employee needs to be kept. You need to keep a record of the overtime, of how many days that they work, which days they are, and so on and so forth. You need to keep a copy of the written employment agreement if there is one, and any other written employment agreements. You also need to keep a copy of your leave records, any balances of accrued but untaken leave. So there's a pile of records that need to be kept, including superannuation contributions, individual flexibility agreements, annualised wages, guaranteed of annual earnings, termination records, and transfer of business records. So there are a pile of records that your employer needs to keep that you actually are entitled to, like I said. Now, I need pay slips from my employer. Am I entitled to them? Yes, it's part of your employee records. You're absolutely entitled to all your pay slips. If you finish work and you haven't downloaded them from whatever website or program your employer has given you access to, then you can just ask them. They should be able to send you a copy of all those pay slips. My employer has told me they want to discipline me for an incident that occurred at work, and I would like information from the investigation he provided for me. Can I request this? It's not technically an employee record. An investigation is normally a confidential process. The sort of documents your employer should be giving you in relation to that process are actually quite restricted. So depending on what you're asking for, you might not be entitled to it. Certainly things like interviews you may not be entitled to. You may not be entitled to the actual complaint itself that was made. So just be aware that there are confidentiality requirements that your employer needs to comply with in order to satisfy that they've done a fair and just process, and sometimes that means you're not entitled to those records. If you have any questions about that, or you think your employer is withholding a record that you are entitled to, we can help you discuss that with your employer and help you either figure out whether you are entitled to it or not, or figure out how to get a copy of it. Okay, I've lost my employment contract. Is that enough of a reason to request another copy from my employer? We don't need a reason to request a copy of your employment contract from your employer, but sure, if you've lost it, that's a reason. You're entitled to your employment contract. It's an employee record, which you have, as per the Fair Work regulations, you're entitled to get access to. Thanks for watching.